What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another Nick 4K video. Today we're checking out a video from Looper, and their video is titled Overhyped Superhero Movies That Ended Up Being Terrible. So we're going to check out this video, and I'm going to see if I agree or disagree.
Superhero movies. Some are good, some are bad, and some, well, let's just say that some got exactly the reaction they deserved. Avengers Endgame was always going to be a tough act to follow. Even so, the MCU still managed to close out Phase 3 with a pretty decent victory lap in Spider-Man Far From Home, leaving many hopeful for the franchise's future. Black Widow, the first movie of the MCU's Phase 4, wasn't amazing, but it was also far from bad. After that, the excellent Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings seemed to set the stage nicely for the third film in the multiverse saga's phase, one that was to introduce the first new superhero team of the post-Endgame era. As it turned out, Eternals became the first MCU movie in history to get a rotten score on Rotten Tomatoes. Today, it's still one of just 3 to earn that unfortunate distinction. Even the so-called worst MCU movies up to that point, like Thor: The Dark World and The Incredible Hulk, got scores comfortably in fresh territory. And yet, despite the pedigree of Oscar-winning director Chloe Zhao and a cast of genuine greats, something just didn't work out with Eternals. Nowadays, the powers that be are apparently so eager to hide the shame of this movie that not one member of the titular team has shown up since. Spider-Man 3 was a
Okay, so for the Eternals, I might be in the minority, and in fact I know I am when I say this, but I actually really like the Eternals. I think it got way more hate than it deserved. I appreciated that it was kind of like a different feel from the traditional Marvel film at the time, and I really like that. I know a lot of people didn't. A lot of people want more of that traditional quips and MCU feel. They want that. But I did appreciate the Eternals kind of taking more of a softer tone. It felt more along the lines of the Zack Snyder's Justice League, so maybe that's why I liked it, because I really love his trilogy. So, you know, the extra nuance that goes with that film, I get, but I also understand that a lot of other people don't really like that, and that's fine too. But I gotta disagree with you there. Eternals is good. So that's just my opinion. I could be wrong, but I don't think I am.
Sequel that launched 1,000 Dancing Peter memes. Yes, this is a film that exposed Peter Parker's dark side, a persona so vile and degenerate that he ends up spending his free time at a jazz club. Now dig on this. In this era of endless crossovers and superhero cameos, it's easy to forget that Sam Raimi's relatively self-contained Spider-Man movies were once some of the most popular comic book adaptations ever made. In fact, along with X-Men, 2002's Spider-Man is credited with kicking off the modern comic book movie boom. Together with its superb sequel, Spider-Man 2, these two movies grossed over $1.5 billion in total and received rave reviews from fans and critics alike. So, when the time came for the inevitable threequel, expectations were high, and so was the budget, which rocketed to an estimated $258 million. The result, the highest grossing movie of the year, and a serious bummer for the fans.
Gonna cry?
In 2014, Marvel Studios released...
Okay, so I think that this video shouldn't be titled Overhyped Superhero Movies That Ended Up Being Terrible. I think this should be considered like superhero movies that ended up not being as good as people thought. You know, I can't really say terrible, especially not Spider-Man 3. Like I said, Eternals is not terrible. Spider-Man 3 is not terrible. Was it disappointing when it first came out? Sure. Is it still the weakest of the trilogy? Yes. But to call it terrible, no, I just disagree with that. Spider-Man 3 has aged really well. I would say it's even good now. It's not like, you know, mega good like the first two, but it is good, and it's a entertaining film. I cannot call it terrible. Now, I assume as this list continues, we're gonna see actual potential terrible superhero movies. So let's start with the Suicide Squad.
Released a colorful movie about a zany ensemble of morally ambiguous B-list rogues coming together for the greater good. Then, 2 years later, DC Films did the exact same thing.
That's a good shot.
That's it. What, we some kind of Suicide Squad?
Of course, mimicry is the sincerest form of flattery in the world of comic books, and this shameless attempt to replicate the success of Guardians of the Galaxy wouldn't have been so bad if it had actually been any good, but it wasn't. The characters aren't fun to watch, the script is atrocious, there's a new needle drop every 15 seconds, and the villain might well be one of the worst in the history of comic book movies. Still, we can be thankful for one thing. Suicide Squad was so prodigiously terrible that it forced DC to make a good version 5 years later. Let's go back to the summer of...
I'll be honest, I think Suicide Squad isn't as bad as people say. Then again, I've only watched it twice. When I saw it in theaters, I thought it was okay. And I saw it a second time, I remember thinking like, yeah, this is fine. But I think the issue with it is that Man of Steel is just so good. And Suicide Squad was being billed as part of that universe. And it just didn't feel right. It felt weird. And I think it's one of those things where it's like, that's completely understandable if you don't like that film. Now, with that said, I would understand the argument for why you would think it's terrible. I can't say terrible. I would go with almost bad. I don't know if I can say exactly bad because there are some good elements in that film. But to say it's just terrible, I don't know, I can't say that.
Of 2011, a time when Marvel was rounding the corner on the Avengers and DC had dollar signs in their eyes. With Christopher Nolan finishing off his mostly acclaimed Batman trilogy, it seemed like a good time to start building a cinematic Justice League. And what better place to start than with the most visually complex and thematically absurd character on the league's roster. Giving Green Lantern credit where credit's due, Ryan Reynolds gave a somewhat charming performance as Hal Jordan. Everything else, however, was an unmitigated disaster, from the woeful CGI to the overcomplicated plot to the bland and boring action sequences. Put us out of our misery, Deadpool.
You're welcome, Canada.
First, there was Batman.
Okay. So, Green Lantern, when that movie came out, it was actually pretty good. I remember thinking that the suit effects looked pretty good. I remember watching it. I didn't go to see that one in theaters. I think I watched that one at home, like on Comcast On Demand or something. I remember the first time I watched it, I thought it was pretty good. Not great, but not bad. I have recently rewatched that film about 2 years ago. And while I do like, Ryan and Blake's chemistry in that film, and in fact, I think this is a film that they met and ended up being together. I like their chemistry and I like their characters and the dynamic between the two of them. The rest of the film, especially like the main enemy, is so choppy and rough. And the CGI hasn't aged as well as I remember it being. So I completely understand terrible. I don't know if I can say it's terrible though. I think it's a rough movie. I'd say almost bad, similar to Suicide Squad, but I could not put it in the same category as a terrible film. Because we're still at the beginning of this video, so I'm sure as the video continues, they're gonna get rough. So let's check it out.
Tim Burton's beloved take on the tale of the Dark Knight. Then there was Batman Returns, Tim Burton's even darker, even more stylized, and for some, even more beloved follow-up.
Meow.
After that, there was Batman Forever, Joel Schumacher's less dark, more stylized, and much less beloved Batman threequel. And then finally, there was Batman and Robin, which kinda just speaks for itself.
Tonight's forecast. A freeze is coming.
It had romance, it had Arnold Schwarzenegger, it had ice skating for some reason. Perhaps most baffling of all though, it also had Coolio, who was somehow the only person in the movie to not make a cold-related pun.
Very nice.
Spider-Man is amazing more often than
Okay,
not.
so I'll be honest with this one. I think it's fair to say Batman and Robin is terrible. I think that's fair to say. But you also have to remember that it was trying to be terrible, right? It was trying to be a parody of itself. Compared to like Suicide Squad and Green Lantern, where they were trying to be serious and they ended up rough. Batman and Robin knew what it was. It knew it was created to sell toys. And I think it had fun with it. So could you say it's terrible from like a grand scale overall quality film? Sure. But to call it terrible and not really think about how much money that film made in just merchandise, because I think I had like every figure from that film. I watched it twice my entire life, but I remember really liking it and thinking it was so cool. So this is all just subjective based on someone's opinion, but I don't know if I can call that one terrible, but I completely understand that one for sure. If you think that's an awful movie, I get it. But I for what it is, I think it's fun.
The Hulk eventually got around to being incredible, but it seems surprisingly difficult to make a fantastic movie about Marvel's first family. After director Tim Story took a couple of cracks at the Fantastic Four in the 2000s, Fox saw fit to hand the franchise over to Josh Trank for a reboot. It's kinda hard to tell what happened next. Trank says that he put together a cut of the movie that he was proud of, until the studio took the project from him. The studio said that Trank threw a bevy of temper tantrums, fought with the actors, and mismanaged the entire production. Stan Lee probably said Excelsior, but that's neither here nor there. He said that a lot. As movies go, Fantastic Four Stick, or whatever the hell it's called, is a difficult one to defend. The characters are bland beyond all belief, their costume designs are much better, and the story is pretty much instantly forgettable. And of course, it doesn't help that this is all capped off with the mother of all bad endings.
It's fantastic.
Say that again?
The first two X-Men movies.
I'll be honest, I like... actually. Okay, I like elements of Fan Four Stick, but it definitely is a bad movie. You can tell that in the bones of that movie was actually something interesting, but with the studio meddling, it got really bad, and now it's just known as one of the worst movies of all time. In fact, when people talk about worst superhero movies, that one is usually at the bottom of the list, so I'm sure as we go on, we're going to see some pretty crazy bad ones.
Helped make superhero movies palatable to the non-geek public, proving that comic book characters really could be deep and engaging. So it was a little jarring when Fox followed them up with X-Men: The Last Stand. Despite being played up in the trailers, beloved characters such as Angel and Colossus were relegated to glorified cameos, while others ended up being names stuck onto weird-looking background mutants. But that's nothing compared to how the film treats its leading players. Cyclops dies off screen, Professor X dies all over the screen, and Magneto goes full mustache-twirling cartoon bad guy. Luckily, the film's tepid fan response bent the ears of the executives over at 20th Century Fox. They never made another noisy, pointless X-Men movie again, right? Just shy of 3 years.
I gotta disagree again. I think that's another one of those things where it's like it's a Spider-Man 3 situation. Is it disappointing compared to the first two? Sure. But is it terrible? No, it's a very fun, solid film. The story keeps on moving. There is no like slow points to the point where like it's overdoing certain scenes. Like every scene is kind of important to the entire plot, which I always liked about that film. It always got more hate than it deserved. Yeah, so I'm gonna say that. But when we get to X-Men Origins, that's a different conversation.
Years later, 20th Century Fox released another noisy, pointless X-Men movie. Starring Hugh Jackman, Lee F. Schreiber, and Hugh Jackman's shirtless torso, X-Men Origins Wolverine took up the task of demystifying the X-Men's most mysterious hero, and it went about as well as you'd expect. There's not a lot that can be said about X-Men Origins Wolverine that hasn't been said already, but we might as well sum up the misfires. For one thing, the decades-long wait for a big-screen Gambit turned out to be a huge disappointment. For another, there's the visual effects, which are somehow less impressive than they had been in the X-Men movies that had come out a decade earlier. And then there's the movie's take on Deadpool, which, well, that's not really something we talk about anymore. The DC Extended Universe was
I agree with that one. Origins is really, really bad. Actually, that might be like the worst superhero movie in my opinion. Does it have its moments? Sure. But overall, it's just a very messy film that like I feel like had potential, but just completely dropped the ball. In my mind, terrible means like it's booty, right? Like there's nothing redeemable about it. So maybe that's just the way I'm looking at the term terrible for this video, but bad, yes. Terrible, no. But I would get the idea if you were to say terrible. I understand completely.
Was already 6 feet under when Black Adam was released. Even if Dwayne Johnson's ego vehicle had somehow been amazing, the damage had been done, and James Gunn and company were already laying the foundation for an entirely new era of DC movies. Nevertheless, Johnson tried very, very hard to convince us all that this movie was something truly special, and that the next big superhero icon had arrived.
The hierarchy of power in the DC universe is about to change.
Johnson obviously has both the charm and the action chops to play a superhero, and he makes a perfectly fine Black Adam. But evidence of the film's many years spent in development hell are all over the finished product, leaving it as a barely coherent mess. Even the special effects were wildly uneven and bordered on amateurish in spots, although in fairness, they could have been worse.
Can we please just take a minute? Sorry, dude. Yeah, but bro, of course.
And so the DCEU limped on towards its doom. Black Adam, meanwhile, is now best remembered as proof that the world of comic book movies is anything but infallible, and that spandex doesn't automatically equal success. Eternals only
Black Adam's fine. I don't think it's terrible. I could understand the argument for bad, but I think it's an okay film. It was obviously trying to effectively soft reboot the DCEU in a way, and it didn't work. It'll age better, like as people go back at, like maybe like in 10 years, people will rewatch it and be like, oh, this is actually a much better film than I remember. Still, is it good? No, but definitely not terrible.
spent 2 years as the only MCU movie with a rotten score on Rotten Tomatoes, as it was joined by Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania in 2023. While Phase 4 certainly suffered some shaky moments, it at least ended with the excellent Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, sparking hope that Phase 5 would get off on the right foot. That it was set to begin with the third installment in the reliably fun Ant-Man series seemed to seal the deal. Things tend to get very complicated when discussing Quantumania, of course, because the one universally agreed upon bright spot was Jonathan Majors' performance as Kang the Conqueror.
You think you can beat me? I am Kang!
But when allegations of abuse came out against Majors, Marvel dropped him, along with all future plans for his character. That makes Quantumania not only one of the worst MCU movies, but perhaps the most non-essential, given that it's built entirely around setting up a villain that was subsequently scrapped. It certainly doesn't help that the rest of the movie is an understuffed mess, one that somehow forgets to let Paul Rudd be funny. After the 1-2 punch of X-Men
terrible, no. Bad, I completely understand. I'm going to say it's very just okay. It's very plain pizza. You know what I mean? Like, it's pizza, sure, I'll eat it, but where's the toppings? You know what I'm saying? Where's the extra zest? It's missing it, and that's the issue. And the thing is, if you look at, like, the special effects and, like, the story elements of what they're pursuing in Ant-Man 3, it is one of those things where, like, they had a setup to do anything they wanted, and they could have been really all-out cool. And it just kind of feels like they didn't take full advantage of what they could do. So it's one of those things where, like, yeah, I would understand if people really don't like it, think it's terrible. I think it's fine. I think it's just a fine film. I couldn't say good. I couldn't say bad. I think it's just all right. Like, it's fine.
Last Stand and X-Men Origins Wolverine, things were beginning to look pretty dire for Marvel's mutants. They weren't down and out just yet though, as 2011's X-Men First Class turned out to be a masterclass in course-correcting a floundering superhero franchise. That movie was so well received, in fact, that Fox felt emboldened to let the franchise take on one of the most iconic stories in X-Men history, with X-Men Days of Future Past. And guess what? They nailed that one too. Between that and the warm reception to James Mangold's The Wolverine, it really did look like the X-Men had once more become a force to be reckoned with. Over in the MCU, the Infinity Saga was building towards its first epic showdown with Thanos, so the X-Men movies attempted to follow suit with their own big blue and beatable bad guy, Apocalypse. Confidence was high among fans, and the trailers for X-Men Apocalypse promised an epic adventure for the increasingly popular younger versions of Fox's X-Men. Sadly though, that anticipation was entirely misplaced, as X-Men Apocalypse was, as Scott Mendelson of Forbes described it, a franchise-killing disaster. Perhaps even more damning was a review from Jen Yamato of the Daily Beast, who said that Apocalypse was a contender for worst X-Men movie up to that point, which is really saying something. A few years later, of course, Dark Phoenix came along and proved that the bar could go lower after all. By that point though, all the hype around these movies had fully died out, and most people were perfectly happy to leave the X-Men with Logan. There's a lot to learn.
I'll be honest, I think that's Apocalypse is another fine film. I would understand the argument for terrible. Even for me, like, there's a lot of bad elements into it, but there's also a lot of good elements in it as well. I haven't watched it for a few years now, so I have to go back and rewatch it. But I'm gonna say, cannot say that one's terrible. It is not.
Love about the concept of the Spider-Verse, not least the fact that it gave us movies like this.
How many more Spider people are there?
Save it for Comic-Con.
What's Comic-Con?
Endless variants of the same character can wear out the welcome quickly, and yet audiences couldn't get enough of it when it came to Spider-Man. That is, until Madam Web came along. This movie promised to expand the growing Spider-Verse with the live-action introductions of Cassandra Webb and a trio of Spider-Women. Instead, all it did was further prove that Sony Pictures can't be trusted with live-action Spider movies without the MCU's guiding hand. And unlike, say, Venom, which is at least bad in a fun way, this one commits the cardinal sin of terrible comic book movies. It's just plain boring. Drawing visual inspiration from Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice was the better part of a century in the making. And why wouldn't you be excited? This was the
I don't think I have to say much about Madam Web. That was a completely terrible film. Best part about it was Sydney Sweeney, and just because she looks good. But besides that, it was very, very rough. Although I will be honest, I like the actor who played Ben Parker in that. I thought he did a pretty good job as like a young Ben. I like that. The rest of it though, rough for sure.
first big screen, big budget attempt to bring together two of American fiction's most iconic characters. Sadly, it didn't turn out that well, as Dawn of Justice was hamstrung by its needlessly grimdark tone, some contrived franchise setup, and a script that felt like whatever comes before a first draft. In the end, what should have been a gripping portrayal of the fight between hope and cynicism instead felt like an almighty showdown between two grumpy action figures. And then, Justice League was supposed to be DC's answer to the Avengers.
Okay, this might be a hot take. I think Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice is actually the theatrical version is rough, but the extended version is good, and I will defend that. Can I say amazing? No, but I do think that Man of Steel, Dawn of Justice extended version, and Zack Snyder's Justice League is a super solid, amazing trilogy. Is it the perfect trilogy? No. Does it have its issues? Yes. But I would say overall, like if you look at it from like instead of looking at it 1 movie, 2 movie, 3 movie, you look at it as one big movie, it is really solid. But I would completely understand the argument against what I'm saying when it comes to these movies, because they're not for everyone. I get it, especially if you are a massive Marvel fan, and I was a big Marvel fan too. I liked the fact that the DCEU felt darker. It was a different tone. I dug it. A lot of other people didn't, so that's okay too. But yeah, I think BVS is not terrible at all. I think it's fine. So like I said, if we're talking theatrical, that's not terrible. The worst you can say is bad for theatrical, and extended, the worst you can say is okay. So that's just the way it is. I don't make the rules around here. Sorry.
At last, this mighty franchise was about to take its place on the field of box office glory. Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, the rest, darn it all, they just couldn't miss. Unless something went horribly wrong, of course. A couple of horribly wrong things later, we ended up with Justice League. Production had been plagued by high-profile problems throughout. Most notably, Zack Snyder left the film after suffering a personal tragedy, prompting Warner Brothers to make the baffling decision to hire Joss Whedon to finish his work. Extensive reshoots in the world's most famous invisible mustache begat one of the most expensive movies ever made. A highly stylized train crash of a film that, against all odds, managed to make over $650 million and still lose money. Booyah. Back in 2003...
Okay, I think in hindsight, looking at that from when I went to go see that in theaters, I thought it was fine. I definitely felt like there was something off about it, and then as time went on, we learned that it's because Zack had his own vision, and then Joss Whedon was brought in and effectively took Zack's vision and morphed it into his own vision. And that's why it felt so weird. Then, of course, we got Zack Snyder's Justice League, which is way better than the Justice League, and so we don't talk about Justice League. So if you want to say that's terrible, I get it. If we're comparing the two movies, Justice League is terrible, so that's fair.
Audiences were ready for a darker take on comic book stories. Fox attempted to meet this demand with Daredevil, the tale of a guilt-ridden disabled Catholic who dresses like the devil and throws bad guys in front of trains. What could possibly go wrong? Written and directed by Mark Steven Johnson, the mind behind Jack Frost and both Grumpy Old Men films, Daredevil mashed together elements of a ton of popular storylines from the comics and added in a load of Evanescence songs for good measure. Despite having a couple of decent moments,
it was the times, baby.
That doesn't entirely suck. Daredevil somehow winds up being an inexplicable cocktail of overstimulation and utter blandness. That said, more than 15 years later, it remains one of the few superhero films to have prominently featured music by Nickelback, so that's something. Daredevil didn't quite...
Okay, I can't say terrible for Daredevil. Come on now. Daredevil is not terrible. The issue was it came out around the same time X-Men was out and Spider-Man was. And Spider-Man was like one of the best movies of its time, of its era, and especially Spider-Man 2. So Daredevil was just like one of those movies that came out trying to ride that hype. While it failed, I cannot say terrible. A bad movie, I could understand completely, but you cannot say terrible. Not possible. When you got Michael Clark Duncan in anything, you can't say terrible. It's just the way it is.
Work out for Fox, but the studio wasn't ready to throw away a potential franchise just yet. And since Jennifer Garner had done an adequate job of flipping around and looking sad in that movie, they decided to give her Elektra. The oft-forgotten second and final entry in Fox's Daredevil-verse reeked heavily of a development meeting, as someone said that there are no bad ideas and genuinely meant it. There's ninjas and magic tattoos and Terrence Stamp and, honestly, probably not a lot of people who made it all the way to the end. Apparently, Garner shot the whole thing while she was on a break from Alias, and sources close to her say that she only did it because she was contractually obligated to do so. Just like everyone else, she appeared to be well aware that the movie was trash. It's rare for a movie to be so...
I don't actually think I watched Elektra, so I can't comment on it, but it always looked pretty rough. So, there you go.
Universally hated that the lead actor shows up to the Golden Raspberry Awards.
Now that's a nice shot.
Wrongdoings. And in that sense, at least, Catwoman is a truly remarkable movie. Right before Christopher and Jonathan Nolan convinced Warner Brothers that the secret to a successful superhero movie was actually making it good, the studio released Catwoman. Halle Berry plays Patience Phillips in the movie, who is most definitely not Michelle Pfeiffer from Batman Returns, yet closely follows the thematic beats of her origin story. An uptight working woman is killed after uncovering corporate corruption before being brought back to life by the magical power of cats? Stop us if you've heard that one before.
I am Catwoman. Hear me roar.
Unlike Batman Returns, however, Catwoman is bad. It's so bad. Most people tend to only remember that infamous basketball scene, so it's easy to forget the rest of the movie is basically just as terrible. You've gotta give Halle Berry serious props for having the sense of humor to show up to the Razzies that year, and you can hardly blame her for the colorful language she used in her acceptance speech. In the midst...
Okay, I'll be honest. It was trying to make like this movie where I wouldn't necessarily say it's trying to sell toys, but it was trying to be like super serious, but at the same time really like not serious at all. And I don't know how to really explain it. I can't really say it's bad, but at the same time, it is a bad movie. And I would completely understand terrible. I don't know if I'd say completely just awful. I actually liked Halle Berry in that movie, and she was really good looking. That was like prime Halle Berry, so, you know, I can't really complain about that. But yeah, overall, I don't know. I can't say terrible, but I would completely understand that you said terrible.
Of the 2000s superhero craze, Hellboy came out of nowhere to become one of the decade's biggest sleeper hit comic book movies.
I'll never give up on you. Ever.
I like that.
After that, it got a sequel that was actually even better. But while Guillermo del Toro had designs on a trilogy before he even finished Hellboy 2: The Golden Army, those plans sadly fell through. The franchise then went dormant for a decade, before being revived for 2019's Hellboy. That this movie was loosely built on the foundation of del Toro's unmade third film piqued a lot more interest than it might have otherwise, and the first footage shown at Comic-Con seemed to suggest it was heading in the right direction. Yet the finished product was a total disaster. Hellboy scored a paltry 17% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes, and even the popcorn meter couldn't crack 50%. The movie was a financial failure too, becoming one of the year's biggest box office bombs. Early on in the MCU,
I didn't see that, so I cannot comment.
It became apparent that things were going to stay pretty family-friendly. At the same time, DC's movie adaptations were allowed to get a little more edgy, a little more wild, and a little more sexy. And with that in mind, 2010's Jonah Hex promised to be something of an antidote to the more sanitized movies over at Marvel. The two lead characters were a Confederate bounty hunter and his sex worker girlfriend, and the movie came courtesy of the screenwriting team behind the gleefully outrageous cult hit Crank. So far, so gritty. Before long though, a few red flags stakes began to be raised around the film's release. During one promotional interview, for example, star Josh Brolin told MTV, "When I first read it, I thought, oh my god, it's awful. And then I had a moment a week later and I thought, why is it awful? Maybe the thing to do is to do the most awful movie I can find." Not only that, but that much vaunted screenwriting team, who are also due to direct, left the project due to creative differences. With all this in mind, maybe it's no surprise that Jonah Hex turned out so badly. The AV Club gave the movie an F rating, while Rolling Stone ranked it even lower than The Last Airbender in its list of the worst movies of 2010. At the box office, it just barely cracked $10 million. And as for Mr. Brolin,
Wow.
his opinion on the movie hasn't changed much. In 2024, he told GQ, "I won't ever stop on Jonah Hex because it was a movie." Had The Spirit came
Yeah,
out...
so I remember Jonah Hex, never watched the actual movie. I bet it's actually a pretty fun movie. Like, it doesn't look good, but it looks fun, right? So it's one of those things, that's okay. I remember the trailer for that was so lame, and so I was completely uninterested. You can really push a movie if you have good marketing, but the issue is, if you're trying to push a bad movie, you got to make really, really good marketing. But if you have a bad movie and you have bad marketing, you're not making any money. That's just the way it is. So yeah, I can't really comment on the movie itself, just the trailer, and I remember the trailer being really boring.
Back in the 1970s, like it was originally supposed to, it would have found an audience that still felt some nostalgia for the comics on which it's based. Instead, the movie spent literally decades failing to get off the ground, with a number of promising false starts inevitably going nowhere for one reason or another. Eventually, it was announced that the Spirit movie was finally getting made, written, and directed by Frank Miller, and made in a similar visual style to Sin City. Obviously, those people who did love those comic books were pretty excited about this. As it turned out though, that bold visual style was just about all the movie had going for it, as the Rotten Tomatoes critical consensus laments under its 14% rating. Though its visuals are unique, the plot is almost incomprehensible, the dialogue is ludicrously mannered, and the characters are unmemorable. These days, we take for granted
I never
the
saw
fact
The
that a new
Spirit, so I can't
superhero movie
comment.
comes out pretty much every week, but that wasn't always the case.
I am Kara of Argo City, daughter of Alora and Zor-El. And I don't scare easily.
And it was a pretty big deal when, in 1984, Supergirl was released not only as a spin-off to the Superman movies, but one that specifically took place between Superman 3 and Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. The movie even shared a star with the Christopher Reeve movies, Jimmy Olsen, played by Superman franchise stalwart Mark McClure. As we now know, the main Superman series was already on a steep decline in quality by this point. Superman 2 was the last of the Reeve movies to be universally beloved. Superman 3 was bad, and The Quest for Peace was even worse. Supergirl didn't fare much better. In fact, it accomplished the seemingly impossible feat of reviewing even worse than Superman 4. Roger Ebert was among the many critics who lambasted the film for its poor visual effects and ropey performances. In his review, he wrote, "Why even go to the trouble of making a movie that feels like it's laughing at itself?" It's hard to imagine in hindsight, but there was once a time when studios seemed convinced that semi-obscure indie comic book characters were a better draw than the ones everybody knew. As filmmakers like Tim Burton and Kevin Smith struggled to get a new Superman movie off the ground, pictures like Judge Dredd, The Mask, and The Phantom came out with astonishing regularity. And without a doubt, Spawn was the one to beat in 1997. The movie featured an iconic 90s anti-hero, and all the grisly action you could ever want. All it had to do was, be good. Well, you can probably guess what happened next. Spawn was poorly received on release. Its pioneering use of CGI looked corny. The writing was abysmal. There's a shocking amount of fart humor, and even worse, the film was PG-13. A planned sequel was put on the back burner before being left there for good, although a Jamie Foxx-led reboot is supposedly in the works, which is testament either to the power of comic book movies or to the obstinance of studio executives. In the late 90s, the
Yeah, so I can't really talk about when it came out. I don't remember how good or bad it was considered, but I know later on Spawn was considered a good movie. Well, goodish, like not bad, I should say. So I can't say terrible for Spawn. I think it's a fun film. It knows what it wants to do, and I think it goes all out with it. So I like it. Completely understand if someone said bad, but I think it's fun.
The world came down with a bad case of Shaq fever after his starring turn in Kazam. It could be that studios thought a superhero movie was the natural next step for basketball's biggest film star, or maybe they just wanted to cash in on a trend. Either way, we ended up getting Steel as a result. Here's the really weird thing. On paper, the plot of this movie bears striking similarities to a far more famous superhero movie.
I am Iron Man.
It's about a weapons designer who, after a fateful accident involving his own creations, builds a suit of power armor to take down the man he used to work with. It's hard to say what made the two movies so contrasting in quality though, besides $100 million, a decade of progress in the development of CGI and the casting of actual actors, that is. The premise behind the original
I never saw Steel, so I can't comment on that.
The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen comics was pretty clever, building a superhero team out of classic public domain characters. This approach made the comics' lead characters instantly recognizable, but without the need to get permission for their use. It was an equally exciting prospect for the big screen, a superhero movie starring characters like Alan Quatermain, Tom Sawyer, Moriarty, and Dr. Jekyll? Who wouldn't love that? In 2003, when the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen hit theaters, the superhero movie genre was riding high, and it seems like all the stars were aligning for another great entry in the genre. Instead, we got a film so bad that it made Sean Connery quit acting. Comic creators Alan Moore and Kevin O'Neill bashed the movie too. And while Moore tends to bash basically every movie based on his work, that doesn't mean he's always off base. He certainly wasn't in this case.
I thought that was a fun film too. I can't say terrible, but I understand especially if you were a big fan of the source material, I get the idea of thinking it's terrible, but as far as movie goes, it's fun. But there you go, guys. That's the end of the video. How did you feel about these? Did you agree with my thoughts? Did you disagree with me? Let me know in the comments below. Make sure to like, subscribe, turn notifications for more videos. Make sure to hype this video. Apparently, that's a new feature. Make sure to hype it. I appreciate that. I don't know what it does, but hit it, please. Thank you. And if you want to check out any more of my videos, make sure to click the links right here on the screen. Thanks. Catch you later. Peace.